some of our favorite places to quote, right? From now on, you will be fishers of people. The time of the Lord's favor. Thou shalt not test the Lord your God. All kinds of good ones. Do you like adventures?
Sure.
Do you like going on adventures?
Sure.
I do. You know, when the Harry Potter books first came out, a colleague of mine said, Harry and his friends, they just keep making all the wrong choices and they keep getting in trouble because they do things that aren't a good idea. But that's where the adventures came from, and that's where the good came from too, because they were willing to do those kinds of things. I think too many people are afraid of adventures. They're afraid about the what-ifs, what might happen, what about the liabilities. They can't even anticipate the pleasure of going on an adventure. You know, all those years that I took my son Ethan to all those doctor's appointments, they could have been a drag. I mean, sometimes we had 4 or 5 of them a week, but we turned them into adventures. There were opportunities to go to our favorite coffee shop, or to go to the gift store at the hospital, or to try out a new restaurant, or try a new route through the city of Seattle and see what we hadn't seen before. They were adventures. We got our favorite Tully's stores, we got our favorite restaurants because of those adventures. I remember a time as a child when, not a time, many times actually, we'd be in the car with my dad, and all of a sudden we were randomly driving these country roads. We had no idea where we were going. Well, my sisters and I had no idea where we were going, and my sisters and I felt it was random, but I'm pretty sure my dad knew what our destination was or what our purpose was, and he was never lost because he knew those roads. But my sisters and I would watch out the windows, watching to see if there were landmarks that we could identify. There weren't. I mean, all the barns looked the same. All the fields of corn and whatever and hay looked the same, and there were a lot of them. But we were on an adventure, and we knew that our dad would get us home safely eventually. But we still watched for those familiar landmarks, and when we saw something that was familiar, you know, we felt like we had scored, but we also felt like we had lost because we knew the adventure was coming to an end. I like adventures, and I like the feelings of them. As a youth pastor, I was always going places, and every trip, all the places I went were new. Rarely went back to the same place. This was before GPS on phones. But as soon as we took a wrong turn, everybody would cry, "It's now really a youth adventure." I took 3 trips to New Orleans, all of them because of ministries, all of them adventures. The first time I went with Lane because he was going for work, and while he was in class all day, I went out researching. I was going to take a mission team there in 6 months, and so I wanted to find out some stuff. So I went walking, and I went touring, and I went to places, and I found all kinds of stuff. I couldn't wait to share. The next 2 times we went, I took mission teams. And you know, flying through Houston, that's an adventure of its own. Every time we went, it seemed there was a thunder and lightning storm that caused us to be, sidelined over to Austin before sending us back to Houston and downing us for the night. Now, the first time, there were almost 40 of us. We took the meal vouchers, we took the cots, and we camped out. But the second time, we weren't going to do that. We were expected in New Orleans for worship the next morning, and by golly, we were going to be there. So we rented a van. There were only 6 of us, and we drove. Lane drove, and somebody else took turns driving. But we drove. The weather was terrible. It took us almost all night. We got 2 hours of sleep, but we made it for worship. We weren't dressed as the South likes to dress for worship, but we were there. It turned out that later on, we would have to rebook our flights home. Since we didn't fly from Houston to New Orleans, I figured, well, you're not going to be in New Orleans, you won't need your flights out of New Orleans, right? Cancel. So we had to rebook them. That was just the beginning of the adventures of that trip. There were so many good ones. Remember, Lane, how one night we went out into the courtyard of the church where we were staying, and it's dark except for porch lights. And we're putting finish on this chair rail that we're going to put up in the church the next day. It's after dark, but we had to get this stuff done. Now, walking around in the dark in the south is risky business because there are fire ant hills everywhere, including in between the blocks on a patio. So we couldn't step in those in the dark, but it's hard to see them in the dark. And every now and then, if you passed under a branch of an overhanging tree, a cockroach would delight in dropping down on your shoulders. But it was so worth the adventure, so worth remembering and sharing. Even more, being part of the adventure validated our faith, it strengthened our faith, and it enticed us into more adventures on God's behalf. Now, of course, not every adventure goes well. That trip driving from Houston to New Orleans, a tornado tracked us that night, or we tracked a tornado. Either way, we traveled together for a bit. That could have been disastrous. It was not. I was reading an essay earlier this week by a colleague who works in Alaska, and she learned to fly seaplanes before she learned to drive a car. She said there's a saying among pilots, there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. Sometimes adventuring does lead to catastrophe. And when faced with scary odds, we might be tempted to not even try. We might be tempted to take the easy way out. We might be tempted to avoid confrontation or to skip the pushback or skirt around the challenges. We might be tempted to stay where everything is comfortable and familiar. But as Jesus discovered, even home is not always a safe place to be. And yielding to temptation might have a bit of evil involved in it, even when things appear benign. Let go and let God, said the tempter to Jesus about leaping from the building. Do it because you can, urged the tempter about turning stones into bread. Get more for yourself, you deserve it, encouraged the tempter about claiming power. But Jesus was firm. He knew who he was. He was the beloved Son of God. And he knew whose he was. He was the beloved Son of the true and living God. Jesus didn't need to show off. He didn't need to be unscrupulous to get what he needed. It was worth the effort not to be superficial, because God's Spirit was with him and in him. Jesus knew his purpose. His purpose was to usher in the kingdom through the grace of God to the people of God. And he knew that he was sent to preach the good news. He knew he was sent to proclaim release to the captives. He knew he was sent to liberate. He knew the time is God's. Jesus knew for whom he did things, and he knew with whom he chose to do things. Come, he said, let us be fishers of people. When Jesus invited those fishermen and others to be his disciples, he was inviting them to an amazing adventure. They would have to set aside a lot that was familiar. They would have to face much that was new. They would be surrounded by crowds, harassed by authorities, irritated by those they considered less important. Eventually, they would end up hiding, fearing for their lives, wondering what came next. But in the process, they would witness the activity of God through Jesus in amazing and profound ways. Healings and transformations and inspiration. They would have the opportunity to examine deeper questions of life. And they would have wisdom applied to it and insight from Jesus. They would be more than observers, more than beneficiaries. They would also be partners and participants in the work of God. Some would be able to say that they saw Jesus or listened to him preach, but the disciples would be able to count themselves intimates and colleagues. Members of this congregation can truly claim to be intimates and colleagues of Jesus. I say this based on what I witnessed these past few weeks as we joined the larger efforts to respond to the tornado. We've talked about this a bit this morning already. How you spent hours walking around in the rain even if you weren't sure you were accomplishing much, because you were told it would accomplish something, so you did. The hours of sitting at a table just waiting for the opportunity to answer questions for which you might not have the answer. And the delight you shared with me that you experienced when somebody actually came through the door. Somebody coming through the door was better than a phone call. You liked it better. The pleasure you found in being there for someone, in listening to their story, in showing true interest in what had happened to them, in being compassionate toward them, and offering what you had. You know, in a connectional system like the United Methodist Church, you can't get away with much for long. It won't be long before others find out. And so on Thursday night, when I went up to Des Moines to the conference office for a meeting, I heard about you. I heard about how amazing you were, how amazing the members of this congregation were, how generous they were with their time, how skilled they were at making assessments. And I heard it more than once, and I heard it in front of other people who also heard it. You are intimates and colleagues of Jesus, for you are willing to go where Jesus goes and do the things that Jesus does. When I called to say someone needed emergency help moving, you came. When someone needs a ride to doctor's appointments or church happenings, you step forward. When someone needs something fixed at home, you fix it. You have plans to be in ministry in our community and in the larger community, and you're excited about those plans. And what tickles me in a perverse kind of way are the phone calls I get saying, we want to do something, how come no one's asking us? You are so committed to serving that you are irked when no one calls you. You are disappointed that the severe weather shelter isn't activated. Who complains when the weather's not that bad? You want to know when you get to bring in socks for the needy. Why is it taking so long? It's in the works, trust me. You're irritated that someone who doesn't care sends you in the wrong direction when you're trying to make plans. You're frustrated by phone calls that go unreturned, essentially turning you down. You're intimates and colleagues of Jesus, where you're willing to go where Jesus goes and do the things Jesus does. Your compassion and generosity show that you have been sitting with Jesus, studying his ways and seeking to be more like him. Your adventurous spirit shows how you've been walking with Jesus, observing what he does, and trying to do likewise. In my book, that is the true definition of disciple. Someone who is seeking to be more like Jesus today than yesterday, more like Jesus tomorrow than today. Being a Christian is a highly worthwhile thing. Being a disciple of Jesus is harder and even more worthwhile. Merriam-Webster tells us that a Christian is one who professes belief in the teachings of Jesus. But Merriam-Webster tells us a disciple is a follower or a student who accepts and assists in spreading the teachings of another. Jesus said, I am the one whom God has sent. This is the year of the Lord's favor. Now is the time to preach good news. Now is the time to proclaim release and recovery. Now is the time to liberate. When the fishermen declared them sinners before Jesus, he told them, don't be afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for people. There is no doubt that good news, release, recovery, and liberation, those are desperately needed in our community, throughout God's world, and in our hearts and our own lives. Methodist DNA is such that if the need is known, we look for a way to help. And disciple DNA is such that when Jesus invites us to join the adventure, we go with anticipation and joy. May the next adventure be truly awesome for you and Jesus together. Amen.
Amen.